The second question today I want to discuss with you, that was asked basically in both Q&A sessions, is what's this about zombies and natural supervenience and panpsychism? So basically, what is this theory of David Chalmers, because it's really out there and really hard to understand. So let me start by saying that I agree that it's a difficult theory. It is hard to understand that he actually believes that. But let me also say that it's very hard to pinpoint where he goes wrong in his argumentation. It's a very coherent view on phenomenal consciousness. And that means that if you have this gut feeling that something is wrong, you need to specify what's wrong. And if you do that and succeed, then you probably have a good grasp on what you think is the relation between phenomenal consciousness and the physical world. If you can't refute him, and it's not for principal reasons that he has an unfalsifiable theory, for instance, so if you admit that the theory is falsifiable, but you can't falsify it, and there is evidence in favor of it, and there are arguments in favor of it, then you maybe should accept that he is right. So let's look at the argument first, and then to his idea of natural supervenience. So Chalmers says, I can conceive of zombies. I can imagine there are zombies. And zombies are physical duplicates that live in a different universe and have no phenomenal consciousness. So what is happening? Okay, so Chalmers is a dualist, clearly, because he says, I can imagine that we duplicate all the physical properties of our universe to another universe. And in that universe, we have thus physical human beings, but they don't have phenomenal consciousness. So clearly, if we copy all the physical stuff to another universe, and we copy only the physical stuff also, and there is no phenomenal consciousness in that universe, then phenomenal consciousness clearly isn't physical. So Chalmers is a dualist, but he is not a substance dualist. So he says that if you would ask how many substances there are, he has to say just one, because the physical substance can exist on its own. So you can have a physical duplicate of our universe without consciousnness. So that's possible, so that's the zombie world, but it's impossible to copy all the phenomenal properties of our universe to a different universe, because the phenomenal properties in some sense depend on, are supervenient on the physical properties, but not in the way, of course, an identity theorist or a functionalist or a connectionist would say. So let's go back to the conceivability argument. So he says, I can imagine that there are zombies when we physically duplicate our universe. So we copy all the physical stuff and only the physical stuff. Then we have a universe in which there are human beings that act the same, that behave exactly the same, that say the same things. So they say, I have consciousness, but they do not have consciousness. And he says, I can imagine that. It's conceivable. And of course, then he needs an argument that says how you can get from conceivability to possibility, because you might conceive of something in your imagination that actually cannot exist. So then he says, I don't see any conceptual contradiction in the notion of a zombie, in the concept of a zombie, and therefore it is possible that zombies actually exist in the other world. So let's take a look at this notion of a conceptual contradiction. What is that? We're all familiar with the concept of a circle, and we're all familiar with the concept of a square. So can you imagine a square circle? Well, if you say I have the concept of a square circle, if you know what a circle is and know what a square is, then a square circle contains a conceptual contradiction. It can't be that something is square and at the same time is a circle. That's just impossible. And the conceptual contradiction shows that it is not possible for square circles to exist. And that means that Chalmers argues, or uses that in an argument, when he says, well, if there is no conceptual contradiction, then it might exist. And since there is no conceptual contradiction in the notion of a zombie, in the concept of a zombie, zombies are possible. Now, this might not be the best argument, but we now went from the conceivability of zombies to the possibility of zombies. And then we have a problem. Because if you say that zombies are actually possible, then they live in a world without phenomenal consciousness. And then phenomenal consciousness is not physical in any way, shape, or form. So how is the relation between phenomenal consciousness that exists in our world and our physical world? And this problem is solved by Chalmers by invoking this idea of natural supervenience. So if we have this classical form of supervenience we addressed in the lectures, then you have, I think I used a stack of sugar cubes, and you have a stack of sugar cubes, and then the shape, that is tower for instance, depends on the building blocks, the sugar cubes, and their relations. When the building blocks, the sugar cubes, have different relations, they could form a circle on your table, for instance. So the shape supervenes on the building blocks and their relations. And that will also be the case in the zombie world. So the type of supervenience he's talking about when he says, in our world, the non-physical phenomenal properties supervene on the physical world in some way. And he's talking about a different type of supervenience, and that's what he calls natural supervenience. And he specifies several laws to explain what he means by that, how that might work. So it's a suggestion. One of these laws, these psychophysical laws, he says, so it's laws that connect the psychological with the physical. I think he should have called them phenomenal physical laws or something like that, that connect the phenomenal with the physical, but he calls them psychophysical laws. I think that's more in line with tradition. But there are laws that connect, in our world, phenomenal properties with physical properties. And basically what he says is, whenever there is a physical, whenever there is a physical difference, there is a phenomenal difference. So that's basically one of those laws. So if I look at something, and so let's say I'm looking at a game of pool, and there's a yellow pool ball, then this pool ball rolls, and there's light falling on the pool ball, it just gets reflected, it stimulates my retina, gets processed in my brain, in V4 for instance, and then it rolls, and there's a movement in the physical world. That means that the light coming out from it is slightly different when it reaches my retina and gets processed in my brain. So there's a difference in my brain, and then you have a physical difference that makes a difference. There is a difference going on in my brain, and that results in an experience. And in this case, it might not be that strange, because then I see a yellow ball moving. But it also works with other physical differences that make a difference. So if you're looking at a clock and the hands of the clock move, there is a physical difference that makes a difference, and therefore the clock also has phenomenal consciousness, because wherever there is a physical difference that makes a difference, there is phenomenal information as well. And that means that it is something it is like to be a clock, but it's also something it is like to be your stomach, or your left toe when there's blood flowing through it, or, well, whatever. And this boils down to panpsychism. Consciousness is everywhere. And that's quite a strange conclusion from this theory. So he's a dualist, he's a panpsychist. Chalmers also is an epiphenomenalist because phenomenal consciousness doesn't do anything, because if it would do something, then it doesn't play this causal role in the zombie world, and then the zombie would act differently, and the zombie acts exactly like we do. So this is why Searle says it's okay to swallow, to bite the occasional bullet. So it's okay to accept some strange conclusion that follows from your theory, but Chalmers swallows an entire arsenal. He has so many strange conclusions, so many counterintuitive conclusions that go against science. For instance, if phenomenal consciousness doesn't do anything, it also can't have a biological evolutionary function. So the experience of pain, the zombie says he has pain, but the zombie doesn't have pain. So if you have this intuition that pain is a very convenient way of telling you that something is wrong with your body, well, no, that's not the case, because the zombie also attends to his wounds when his tissue gets damaged, when he cuts his hand or something like that. So what's wrong with this theory? You tell me, and if you know, I think you have a better grasp on how you yourself think about phenomenal consciousness and its place in the physical world.